Justice Committee meeting, and on the agenda we have today is Senate Bill 8 and Senate Resolution 7. And if you wouldn't, I think we have some more folks who want to speak on this issue. And as I understand it, Ms. Heather Stockdale with Georgia Cares was speaking, and I think she had a few other things she wanted to say, and we definitely want to give her the opportunity to finish up, and then we'll continue with the testimony and evidence that we were hearing. So with that, is Ms. Stockdale present? Oh, you're up. Well, good deal. I just want to make sure we give you an opportunity to complete what you were talking about yesterday.
Okay.
All right.
I think I completed it, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions for Ms. Stockdale from the committee? I don't see any at this time, but there may be some coming up. Okay. All right. Next on our sign-up list, we have Catherine Bernard. Ms. Bernard? Then what about Jennifer Swain from U-Spark? What would you like? Would you like to go at the podium or at the seat?
Whatever you prefer.
It's either way with me is good.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Swain.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. To the members of the committee, thank you for hearing me today. My name is Jennifer Swain, and I am the Interim Executive Director of U-Spark, which is formerly the Juvenile Justice Fund. We were born about 15 years ago in the Fulton County Juvenile Court, and we still serve on the front lines there today. I am here in support of Senate Bill 8 for a lot of reasons, and yesterday we had a report that was done by our Future Not the Past campaign in 2012 and 2013 that was mentioned yesterday, so I think that you guys have a copy of that. We recognize that there are areas of growth for us to move as we continue to look at gaps and needs of research, and this one provider project was done because we wanted to find out what real information from service agencies who were actually working with victims of child sex trafficking. So we created a database and asked for organizations, and while the report that you have titled the Provider Project is a compilation of 12 cities, out of that group of cities, Georgia had 3 different service groups represented in that report. And from that, on page 8, you will see that in 2012, the actual victims that were served through those organizations, 12% actually reported being exploited through the adult entertainment industry or adult entertainment venue, and in 2013 that number moved up to 14%. As well as yesterday, speaking about the direct numbers, another comment that was mentioned was about prevention and early intervention. And our organization has changed its focus over the years to continue to serve in the gaps. And one of the things that we've been doing, working on the front line at Fulton County Juvenile Court, is working on how to intervene with young girls who may be in the juvenile justice system who may not self-identify as a victim. We started Youth Spark Voices back in 2010.
Hold on just a second.
Okay.
And I wasn't here for the hearing yesterday,
Okay.
but you just mentioned girls that are in the system in Atlanta that don't self-identify as victims.
Yes.
Now, for my clarification, and may not be for the rest of the committee's clarification, can you help me understand exactly what you mean by that?
Yes, sir. And I apologize that I realized you were not here yesterday.
No, that wasn't your fault. Thank you.
When we say that girls or victims don't self-identify immediately, it means that they don't believe that they are a victim of trafficking. Many girls come into custody or into service when they believe that that 25-year-old or that older adult male is actually their boyfriend. They believe that sometimes they are having to do what is necessary because he's been taking care of them, and they don't really look at him as a trafficker or as an inappropriate adult choosing to exploit them. They look at it as their boyfriend, and so they don't necessarily identify.
As if they were consensual in this.
Yes.
But these are girls that are under age 18 for sure, and likely under age 16.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, now, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was wanting
No, it's
to get
okay.
that square.
So I think one of the things that we've been able to see as we work with girls, as when Georgia Cares was established in 2009, we recognized that there were Georgia Cares, which is a statewide entry for all trafficking victims throughout the state of Georgia. Before then, all of the services for victims were coordinated through our program at the time, which was the CEASE program. And what would happen is once we transferred services so that it could be a single coordinated effort through Georgia Cares, there were about 6 girls that remained under the Juvenile Justice Fund arm that did not qualify for services through Georgia Cares because they had not admitted or understood their exploitation. That was the vision behind our first intervention program, which is really the first program that's created in the state of Georgia and nationally that works with different sectors to identify girls and wrap services around them, some which are clinical in nature and some which are educational in nature, so that we can begin to help them recognize that they are a victim and then to take away that distrust of service providers so that they can get the help that they need. And in Youth Spark Voices, we recognize that we are taking preventative and early intervention measures, and we also work very closely with Georgia Cares. So if a girl is identified in our group and after 3 months or a couple of weeks begin to understand her exploitation, we then refer them back to Georgia Cares for the services that they need. We remarked yesterday that right now residential treatment and services for girls are about $5,600 a month. Over the last 4 years when we have been developing Youth Spark Voices, our prevention and early intervention services are around $3,000 per girl per year. So we recognize the need to continue to take a proactive approach, and I really thank you guys for being able to include prevention and early intervention into the conversation. Because as we continue as grassroots organization, especially Youth Spark, to focus on educating those on the front line, especially the juvenile justice system, especially those who are involved in foster care, residential treatment, those in schools as well. We understand that as we provide that education and provide the process, that they will begin to recognize and identify these kids earlier and bring them into care.
All right. Any questions for Ms. Swain? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
When it comes to, I do have a question for you. When it comes to Youth Spark and exactly how are you guys getting involved? What's the avenue that you take in order to be involved with these children?
Well, while we serve as a catalyst for the Fulton County Juvenile Court and Georgia Cares. Our offices are located in the court. We do have a trauma-trained clinician on staff as well. And what happens is if a girl, we have trained the probation department specifically on what the signs are for a girl who may look just like the victim, but she just may not identify it or say, yes, I am being commercially sexually exploited, which many of them don't. So what we've trained them to do is recognize a certain list of key factors, which include truancy, runaway, inappropriate adult relationships, unhealthy sexual sexual behavior, risky behaviors. And once we train them to recognize those red flags, because we do know that there's a series of events that happen really before the pimp comes into play. And we really want to start to focus on those things as much as rescue and recovery so that we can begin to work on both sides of the spectrum. So once the probation department has been educated on this, once they have a girl in front of them, and unfortunately at this point she's in the juvenile system for runaway, truancy, or so many other things that have negative stigmas attached. But once they identify those, we ask them, number one, to create a referral directly to Georgia Cares so that that child may be assessed to ensure that she's not already a trafficking victim. Many of the times, they automatically say no. They don't get it. And if you say the word prostitute, they'll definitely deny that because they don't necessarily believe that that's what they're involved in. So when that happens, the child is placed into Youth Spark Voices, where we meet every Thursday from 4:30 to 6:30, and we begin to give that child an individual action plan. One which creates about five goals. 2 that the child and or the parent or guardian place themselves, that they want to reduce certain behavior. But 3 is also to close that child's probation case, to increase that child's attendance in school, and to ensure that that child does not go down the path of becoming a victim. Because we know that if we don't typically intervene at that point, then she will show up with more trauma or actual exploitation and physical violence within the next 9 to 12 months from being first identified in the court. At that point, we begin to not only connect that child to services and wipe away that distrust of service providers and law enforcement, we really began to create what we call psychoeducational services so that they understand what trafficking is. But before we can get into this older guy is not your boyfriend, we have to teach that child effective communication and effective listening, because that's primarily the number one thing that makes that child run away from home, increasing her vulnerability to traffickers. So our program is very different. It's more of a holistic approach, but we have to pair that education. And we've seen instances where girls, typically somewhere between 9 to 15 weeks, begin to recognize or understand more their vulnerability. And then at that point, they do become comfortable and they will admit it and say. And then we hold their hand back into the care of Georgia Cares. I am very pleased to say that last year we were able to work with a girl. She was brought into the care of the court in December of 2013. We started working with that child in Youth Spark Voices at that point, and by March, that child was able to say, because she was in fear of her life, that this guy is going to take me to Panama City Beach. He says I have to do what I need to do, and at that point, we began to work with her and her family. Unfortunately, their family did not have the funds available that will cover residential treatment. So I am not proud to say that we were able to kind of work with DFACS, and mom was willing to put that child into custody so that she could get the services that she need. But we've had to find creative ways to get it paid for, because we knew that that child was in fear of her life. Within March, that child went back into the care of Georgia Cares. They began to coordinate services, and she went directly into a safe home at Wellspring Living. In January of this year, that child graduated from that program and was reintegrated back into home. She did not go back to the middle school, where her trafficker continued to pick her up every single day after she was dropped off. She's serving as a peer leader for the girls in our group. And while she was not exploited in a certain venue or through the adult entertainment system, we know that the approach that we have here in Georgia, which is very new, is working well, and it is responding. So we were very grateful to see a child come full circle, and now this child is actually moving out of state to go to Job Corps so that she does have a more stable life. So we're very grateful for our partnership, and recognize as nonprofits, we have to do a better job of providing resources and support, research, and education for everyone. But I do recognize that as we continue to train other juvenile courts across the state on this early intervention model, then more girls will come into care faster than what they have been doing before, because once they reach Georgia Cares, then it's done already. So we really want them to understand that understanding what's happening to them is a very tough process. Being able to say that I've been a victim, not only of sexual abuse, but as of commercial sexual exploitation. And as that child begins to recognize that this guy who I've loved is not my boyfriend, that's a very terrifying experience. It doesn't happen in one assessment, but we're really, again, really grateful for our partnership, and we're really grateful for the information that we do have from working on the ground, that we can teach a lot more people, including schools, on how to intervene earlier and not wait until the worst of the worst has happened.
Thank you. I have some questions from the panel. Representative Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Just a couple of questions. Can you speak to the value of having shelters available, bed space available in terms of the prosecution of pimps?
Absolutely. I think that our law enforcement has been doing a phenomenal job here because many of them and many of the agencies are taking a very proactive approach. And now that they are aware of more and more signs on how to identify victims earlier, I think as we continue to educate the public on how to report suspicious behavior, then they're going to get more and more tips. So I think as GBI Director Vernon Keenan has stated several times that as they begin to uncover more girls, that they want to be able to place that child somewhere immediately. We know that right now there is a wait list for certain beds, and while we are proud to say we have a high fraction of the beds in the nation here in our state, we recognize that we need more. And we recognize we need, to be able to have beds available immediately for girls and for boys as well, because we've seen an increase of boys coming through the juvenile court who've been identified.
If they don't have a bed available, what happens to the girl typically?
Well, especially in the Fulton County area right now, we're grateful because we put them into our Voices group so that we can begin to keep our hands on them. We know that Georgia Cares has their own approach and wraparound services so that the child is monitored. But at the end of the day, if that child is not in a home, in a safe environment, a safe place with the services wrapped around, then the likelihood of that child running away from home is very, very high. And we know statistics say that within the first 48 hours of a child running away from home, 1 in 3 will be lured into prostitution or approached by a trafficker. So we recognize that time is absolutely of the essence.
And the young girl that you spoke of a moment ago that had gone through rehabilitation from March to January, that period of time, does she have her life back as a result of Youth Spark's intervention and Georgia Cares intervention?
She's getting it back. I think that one of the things that we see is that they don't really lose themselves. It's just hidden deep inside of them. They're still there, and I think that I am amazed constantly by seeing the resilience of survivors. And I hope that we have another opportunity for survivors to really speak to this issue, because one of the great reasons why we're making great strides here in Georgia is because more women are stepping up and speaking out, so it takes away that shame. It takes away that guilt that they have. And I really do believe that had we not wrapped those services around that child when she came through that juvenile court, then she may not have made it to Georgia Cares. Her mother may not have understood the things that she needed to do in order to get that child into custody immediately. So we are very appreciative of that.
A few more questions, Chairman, if I may.
Sure.
Youth Spark, where does it get its funding?
Well, we are a mixture of public and private partnership. We do have a good amount of VOCA and United Way monies as well, but we are heavily funded by foundations, which quite frankly scares us, because we recognize that foundation money is not always available. And again, we take a lot of proactive approach of fundraising, individual support, communities and churches, but again, we stretch every dollar as long as we can.
Are there state revenues that are state dollars allocated to Youth Spark?
From the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council through VOCA,
Okay.
the Victims of Crime Act.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Rakestraw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few questions too. So you initially said that this was formerly the Juvenile Justice Fund, and
Yes.
that changed over? Okay. So when did that start?
Well, we went and did some rebranding, and it really was just a name change, because we realized throughout our journey as we began to move forward, and under Youth Spark we have two programs, one which is our direct service arm, which is Youth Spark Voices, and the other is the advocacy arm of Future Not a Past campaign, which has spearheaded some groundbreaking research and even spearheaded the first law enforcement training here. But as our journey, and we travel with the movement, so to speak, and when we begin to take the more proactive approach in intervening earlier, we recognize that people don't really take friendly to Juvenile Justice Fund. Schools don't take friendly to that. So we really wanted to take a more empowered approach, and so we went through some rebranding in 2012 and came out with Youth Spark.
Okay. And so I missed yesterday. So you said once they get to Georgia Cares. Now, what piece is it that Georgia Cares does?
Georgia Cares is the single point of entry for all victims across the state of Georgia that was created by the Governor's Office for Children and Families in 2009. So they coordinate services for all victims, boys and girls under the age of 18.
Okay, and then these kids are, you said a lot of them are underage with their boyfriends. So are those boyfriends not being prosecuted as a sexual predator?
Not all the time, and unfortunately what we see is that there's a level of trauma bonding, so we may never even know who that guy is. And if we can somehow get a name, we have a very close partnership with the Child Exploitation Unit at APD, so sometimes if we can get a small name, we can begin to send that information over because it may help in some way. But a lot of girls, and even their parents, they just don't know about the guy. They won't give up a name.
Okay, and then you said that early intervention, some of the indicators are truancy, runaway, unhealthy adult relationships. What were some of the other indicators?
If there's been a history of physical or domestic violence in the home, a history of drug abuse, one of the main things that I recognized when we started this is that there is a lack of parental accountability for a lot of these underage girls, and they tend to self-parent. And what I mean by self-parent is they don't necessarily have rules. They don't have structure. One of the girls in our program, the very first cohort, her mother wouldn't wake her up for school in the morning. She just was allowed to take care of herself. And so we recognize when you couple those things together, especially with sexual abuse, and we recognize that about 80 to 90% of trafficking victims have a history of sexual abuse, then that child is extremely vulnerable. So we really want to make sure that while we don't have all of the red flags and all of the check marks that we can just go down the list, we really encourage the probation officers to ask more questions. Not necessarily, are you being a trafficking victim, but rather, where did you sleep last night? What did you eat? Those are different questions that we train certain sectors to ask that will indicate other behaviors to let them know that their child's at risk.
Did you say you're able to do this in schools, or it doesn't really, until they get into a probation situation, that you're able to start identifying early?
Well, right now, I think the thing that really allows our program to have success is because we do have the backing of the juvenile court. And we do need an authority arm. The first year we started this, we wanted to accept community-based referrals, but we would do that maybe by a counselor or by a mentoring group or sometimes even a parent. But then, when we need consistency, we need to see that child every week to develop that relationship, to begin to embed the information into her. If the parent doesn't have any authority arm to make them show up every week, then it's hard for us to be consistent. So the juvenile court allows us that arm, and they will write actually the order into that child's probation order. They help us when the parents are not non-compliant, when we can't get a phone number, but we also have to do certain things such as provide transportation. For those kids who are approved to take MARTA and they're not a flight risk, we provide MARTA cards. But for those kids who we know are a flight risk, or they can't take MARTA, or they're 13 years old, and by our own rules and policies, we don't allow 13-year-olds, we have some very dedicated volunteers who will pick that child up in the middle of rush hour traffic and ensure she gets to the group every Thursday. In addition, we have to provide a full meal because we recognize that those are the bare needs that we tend to not realize that are necessary, but to a lot of young girls coming through that may be the only full balanced meal that they get a week.
Okay, and I'm almost done with my questions. So what is your success rate? How do y'all measure your success, and what is your success rate of, getting the girls off the streets and out of that lifestyle?
Well, because I think that our program is still a little bit in its infancy, this is the 4th year that we've been going. Right now, our primary evaluation measures are through self-report and through our own individual action plan and how that child meets certain goals. I can definitely follow up and provide you with our full metric list so that you can actually see. But we do a lot of self-assessment once a quarter, and based on certain grants that we have through United Way and through VOCA, we have to provide those different things. So we recognize that we move our girls once they're typically in the program for 12 months. we have a graduation or a recognition ceremony in December, and we don't just kind of drop them off at that point. We re-engage them so that they learn more life skills into what we call the Youth Spark Voices Alumni Leadership Institute. We paired that child with mentor, job skills, higher education learning, so we really don't take our hand off of them. One of our mottos is once a voices girl, always a voices girl. But what we've seen is about out of we've served about 32 to 35 girls annually, and what we've seen is only about 10% of that are not really receptive to the services and don't make visible behavior changes. And that primarily is because of lack of consistency. If we see that child once every 2 to 3 months, it's really hard for us to get that education and have her to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
But we are working toward evaluation with the local university so that we can have formal evaluation measures.
And do these kids age out at 18, or is there, if they're older, is there a program that would work for them, or it's done when they're 18?
Well, we say once a voices girl, always a voices girl.
Yeah, but say they didn't know about the program and they're 21 and
I
they
think
can't
as a
get
matter
into
of
the
law,
program.
that once a child reaches age 18, then they're emancipated and deemed to be an adult. So I think yes would be the answer to that. But what I think you're saying is the child still is able to come back and talk or have access to some sort of counseling or services that you provide.
Absolutely.
right?
As long as they were in prior to age 18. Not
Absolutely.
like they can't reach back, later on because you've only been around 4 years. So kids that we may have missed that may be 22 or 23 now can't come into the program? Or
No,
there's
we
not a
don't accept
program to
any
serve them?
referrals for girls over the age of 18. However, we have had girls to bring someone with them from the community and say, she needs this help. She may be 19 or 20, but at that point we refer them to community-based programs such as Living Water for Girls and their training and education resource center. So we really rely heavily on our partnerships and collaborations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. Representative Chandler.
Thank you so much for what you do.
You're welcome.
And just a few questions and observations. You mentioned, I don't think I was on time. If I,
I'm sorry, excuse me.
but I have a loud voice anyway. If you mentioned a voices group, now is that group that you mentioned that meets from 4:30 to 6:30?
Yes, ma'am, every Thursday.
Okay, and in that group, are the girls encouraged as they progress to share where they are and even to admit that they have been sexually exploited, and the girls are learning from each other then?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the best components of
Yeah,
our group.
absolutely.
I remember the first year we started this, many times that we would be sitting in the room and they would stare at us and we'd stare back, and it would be this very awkward moment. But I think 4 years into this, we've now created a space where when a girl comes in, it's easier for us to develop that rapport with her because she has a girl sitting here next to her, and at the beginning of every group we have a check-in, and that child is allowed to say whether they're a 0 or whether they're a 10. We allow 0s, and we want to hope to get them to a 5 before they leave. But the girls pour into one another. And when you have a 15-year-old girl that may talk about her sexual abuse and why she wanted to run away from home, to a girl who's very new, she will feel a little bit more comfortable, and we really give them the space to be honest and react in that way.
Thank you. Another question, please, sir, and then I'll be quick. I suspect one of the strongest elements of your program are those support groups. That would be my observation, just in working with them. And that leads me to my question. You mentioned that you're under the umbrella of the juvenile courts. Are you all able to get into the schools? I know that these girls are not attending regularly, but if they're under 16, they're enrolled somewhere. Are you able to get in the schools and work with a school counselor?
On individual basis, I've done personally myself several trainings as well as other community-based groups with counselors, social workers that are inside of the school. And now individual schools are coming to us because the kids want to create a club focused on this. So we do have about 4 active schools right now. Some are private schools and some are public schools that have what we call Youth Spark Igniter groups. Those are groups that are formed by the students. They went through the process within their school, and we are able to go in and provide that education. One of our community partners, which is Street Grace, which is the faith-based coalition, they also operate a teacher portal so that teachers, along with the partnership of the Georgia Department of Education, are required to go in and get education on how to spot victims and what to do. So I think it is a tough subject, especially with the material that is out here. But one of the things that we're really committed to doing at Youth Spark is creating teen-friendly material that is bold and educational in nature, but is not sexually overt or something that will really terrify the child. So we want to meet the schools halfway by providing things that are appropriate, that are not too sexually overt in nature, that they can use. But we're getting more and more, I see over the last 2 years, more and more schools willing to open it up and have that conversation.
I suspect you would have many schools that would allow you to co-lead groups with a school counselor, and you might reach many girls that way.
Yes, ma'am. We're working on certain schools who recognize that they have higher vulnerability, and we really want to create a very strategic way of being able to expand our program. And we're working toward that through a portal that is funded by Microsoft, and it's called Voices Online, and it will really empower communities to serve and work with prevention education all on your own. But we do have other juvenile courts that are interested in this program, including Clayton and Douglas, and we're really working now how to take this program to scale. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Swain, thank you for being with us today. Did you mention, I thought I heard you say you received funding from the Governor's Office of Children and Families, is that right? Or
No,
Okay.
that was the office that spearheaded the Georgia Cares, the statewide coordinating.
But that's not a funding component.
No.
And of the children that you've talked to us about today, do you know how many of them were actually being trafficked from an adult entertainment establishment?
Not in our group.
None.
No. We do know that there was a time about a year and a half ago where it seemed to be a lot of young girls who were interested in the adult entertainment industry, and they spoke to us about it. They said that they were interested. There were people in their lives who said that they could make lots of money in that way, and these are girls all under the age of 18. Because our program is very non-traditional, we were able to reach out to friends and to partners to find someone who did work in that industry to come in and speak with our girls about what that exploitation is and how it is no different than being trafficked on the street, except that this club or this venue serves as the pimp and you're beginning to work for them. So we began to place resources in immediately when that conversation started, but we recognized that there was this interest and this connection between those girls who were approached by someone in the community and said that, hey, you can make money in here. I know how to kind of get you an ID or a permit. And so, but we've not had any specific accounts of girls in our Voices group that have been exploited through that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Representative Oliver.
In relation to the adult entertainment industry, I'm aware of some investigations that were done in relation to false IDs for children less than majority age. In order to get a permit to do dancing in those clubs, you have to have a permit where you prove you're 18. I'm saying this for the benefit of the false IDs is part of the industry on some of its criminal elements to recruit children into the dance clubs against the law. And there's a fair amount of research and analysis about that. Clearly, I believe the evidence is that children who are recruited into that criminal element of the dance clubs, which is not all of them, has a direct overlap with sexual trafficking criminality also.
Absolutely, and we do recognize that there are certain clubs that abide by those rules, but there are more clubs that are popping up that may not even be on the radar, that may not operate in that way. So your concern is very valid.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. All right. I don't have any other questions at this time. Thank you, Ms. Swain.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Pamela Karn from Interfaith Children's Movement.
Good
Thank you.
afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee. Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to come to speak to you today in support of Senate Bill 8 and Senate Resolution 7. The Interfaith Children's Movement, of which I serve as the coordinator, and my name is Pamela Perkins Karn. I serve as the coordinator, was founded in 2001 as a child advocacy movement that was first based here, that was first focusing on Metro Atlanta, but now focuses statewide on children and families. Today I have the distinct honor of actually catching up a bit on yesterday and then moving us forward, especially in the realm of the adult entertainment area.
Okay.
Yesterday there was testimony given by others who identified other states where this type of law or one that's similar to it has been passed. They cited case studies and court studies on court cases that supported that, and I think that you probably now have all of that information. On Texas and Utah, we do know that Florida is now exploring the same type of scenario to pass a law and that assesses some type of fee on adult entertainment businesses due to their spatial relationship or their proximity to the advent of human trafficking, human sex trafficking in particular. There are questions regarding about Atlanta. Have we seen that in Atlanta? And I want to take us back to 1999. And there's a report by Paul Manair from Georgia State University College of Law. He actually released this report in 2009. And I'm sorry.
What's the name of the author?
It's Paul, P-A-U-L, M-E-N-A-I-R. And he actually, with Georgia State College of Law, Georgia State University.
Okay. Thank you.
And in his report, he went back to 1999 to look at what he was, the title of that report was he was looking at the increase in the law penalties for pimping and pandering in particular. And one of the cases he stated, and this was not actually at this point a law case or court case, he was stating a case that occurred in the community. And Judge Glenda Hatchett, back in 1999, had a visit by a number of women, a group of women, when she was chief judge of Fulton County Court. And it was a delegation of concerned women, and she took them to the district attorney's office, who was Paul Howard at the time, and still continues to be, to request increased legal scrutiny of the prostitution of children in metropolitan Atlanta, in particular in Atlanta. And they cited their special concerns. And the reason this is relevant is because their first concern included strip clubs, which participated in their words, child prostitution. For example, providing false identification to underage females so that they can work in the club. Now, in 1999, pimping and pandering was a misdemeanor, and so to start a movement on adult entertainment clubs at that point would not have been as fruitful as it can be today. And so what they advised them to do, Judge Hatchett advised the concerned women delegation, was to start a grassroots movement to address the issue. And so from that time to this day, that movement continues. And we still have the same concerns about the adult entertainment industry. Yesterday there was testimony given as to why other businesses, why not hotels, why not restaurants, because they too are used in some form or fashion in the human sex trafficking business. And so they too can be included as part of being part of the industry, as opposed to just identifying the adult entertainment industry. One of the things that was in the Texas report is from the Attorney General, who said that study after study has shown that surrounding adult entertainment industries is an increase is criminal activity. And so what we did was we went back
Wait,
and we
say that again.
around adult entertainment businesses is criminal activity. They find criminal activity.
And that activity it would not exist there but for the adult entertainment establishment?
I won't say those were, that's definitely what his intent was in saying. He said that because of the presence of the adult entertainment business, that you find that it promotes criminal activity, not the person who owns the club, but the presence of the club itself.
Present being active and providing adult entertainment.
Yes, that in and of itself increases the potential of criminal activity, and we'll be happy to provide that.
Could you provide us that information?
Yes. So in looking at that and thinking about why not the restaurants or why not the hotels, why would this fee not be applied to those? If you take a look at just a simple look at this and say, okay, I'll go out and look for a hotel online, for example, and I can say, give me the top hotels in Georgia, and I'll get a list of top hotels in Georgia. What I will see online on that particular website will be pictures of hotels, pictures of vacation packages, or pictures of resort areas. If I ask, give me the top restaurants in Georgia, what I will see are pictures of restaurants, pictures of food, pictures of people sitting down at a meal. When I say, give me the top strip clubs in Georgia, I get pictures of people having sex, people soliciting sex. I get comments that have, in your reviews, if you click on the review link, you get reviews that have X-rated language. You get reviews that say, here's where you need to go to find a girl who will do whatever you want. When I look at the reviews for the hotels, I get, this was a nice family venue. We had a good time. Or the rooms are nice. When I look at the reviews for the restaurants, they say, oh, well, the food was pretty good. It might have been mediocre. I don't get the sexual content when I look at venues for hotels or venues for restaurants in the same way that you get actual explicit sexual content when you look up, give me the top strip clubs in Georgia. We do have some a packet of information that we would like to pass out to you so that you could actually see the content. If you are squeamish about X-rated content, then you may pass it on to your colleague. And we also have content in the same way of the hotel sites that we also picked up offline and that we printed offline in the restaurants as well. We cannot say that the strip clubs do not promote promote sexual gratification or sexual stimulation. That's what they do. That's what the business is. But with that also comes the perpetrators who prey on child victims who may be there who are underage. We have, as is used against sometimes the children, the term bad actors. We have bad actors in the adult entertainment industry. And so therefore, they need to be held accountable in the same way that we would hold any other bad actors accountable for their negative contributions to society. And with that, are there any questions?
Well, this is a public evidentiary hearing for the purpose of making a fundamental finding that there is a connection between adult entertainment establishment and the law that we are going to potentially vote out of this committee or vote otherwise. So the evidence is necessarily required to be provided, and it's a public forum. So we are dealing with some subject matter that requires measured approach in private conversations, and there's always everyone appreciates being someone who's considerate in the way they present themselves, and you have certainly been that way, and I appreciate your approach. However, the law must be created in a public environment so that everybody sees the way it's made, the way the sausage is made, so to speak. That's the kind of catchphrase around here. So at the risk of being embarrassed myself, I don't want that to overcome the requirement that this be open and transparent deliberation on evidence that's available to anybody who needs to see it.
Great.
And I'm not asking for things I don't want to see, but I do want to. I will not allow that to stand in my way or the committee's way of transparently deliberating on this. So don't hesitate, and this goes to anybody presenting in this committee. Bring it to the table, put it on the screen, because everybody needs to see what is happening and why there's a connection, if there is a connection between adult entertainment establishments and crime and potential laws that will punish crime or inappropriate activity that's going on. So I want to, and I'm not admonishing you, I just want to make sure we get a clear statement of the policy of this committee and how we're going to deal with things.
And thank you so much for clarifying that, because I did ask earlier, were there any obscenity, restrictions within the chamber? And so,
well, it just can't be personal. It just has to be objective.
Well, we do.
The
have
chairman just said that, didn't he?
We do have a printed copy of each venue. One of looking at the selection of give me the top hotels, give me the top restaurants, give me the top strip clubs, and so you can leaf through those and see the difference as to.
You can print it, or you can put it up on that screen right there, or the screen over there.
Okay. Do we have anyone under 18?
Oh, you have copies with you?
Under 21?
Okay.
I guess.
Well, right. If you have copies with it, we'll be happy to distribute those to the
and
members.
I can just pass these down. The other thing, in just to refer back to Florida, and this was in the past 3 to 4 months, one of the reasons that they are now looking at this type of law is that they recovered a 13-year-old from the strip club on South Beach, which is actually where Rachel, of Rachel's Law, was taken, and that's where she was recovered from. And so that is another connection here from Georgia, where our girls are actually, and boys as well, are taken to places like South Beach to be exploited and to be sexually trafficked.
Okay. Representative Wilkerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this may be a question for you or maybe the sponsor of the bill, but I'm looking at, I guess, the fiscal note that kind of details the costs and gives us some backgrounds. And it says the average revenue per establishment is about $2.1 million. So I guess 1% of that, we're looking at about $21,000 or so that from each different club is what we're looking at pushing, putting a fee on, I guess, right? Is that about right?
I would like to refer that to the sponsor of the bill, since they created the fiscal note.
Okay, that's page 5. And then while we're doing that, I guess maybe you can talk about this one, is who would actually pay that fee? Would it be the club, or would they push that fee down to whoever works there?
Well, that's actually up to the business. There's no control mechanism as to how they create that fee or recoup that fee. But the club does have to.
But understanding the nature of the business, Mr. Chairman, I guess, what is the likelihood in your mind that they would force the workers to pay that fee versus them eating that $21,000 themselves?
It depends on the type of person who's running the club, I would say. I wouldn't want to generalize and say that all of them would just push that down to the workers, which, if we look at common practice today, that when you assess, some businesses a fee, then some of the comments you hear is that now our customers will have to pay for that. We'll have to increase our cost for our customers, or whether that's the workers. That's totally up to them. But how they gather the money to pay the fee is totally up to that business.
Okay. And then one more question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And then as far as the crime, is there a breakout between the type of crime? Because is it, people are selling videos out front that illegally, is it prostitution? I mean, what type of crimes is it traditionally that are outside these clubs?
And it depends on the area. But what we have seen in some of the reports is that it's different types of criminal activity. You will have the violent crimes that occur, whether it's the shootings or the stabbings, but you also have the sex trafficking crimes or the crimes of prostitution, where there are the raids and or the undercover agents who go inside the club and pretend to be a customer. So the types of criminal activity vary, but you will see usually it is crimes of violence. And crimes of sexual crimes.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
So those two types of criminal activity.
Thank you so much.
You also have a couple of places that have been shut down for like illegal gambling. So the types of crimes vary.
Representative Welch. Oh, excuse me. Representative Oliver.
Thank you very much. I've been a fan of your group for a long time. The other part of the history that's relevant to the committee, I think, is that in addition to Judge Hatchett's leadership for a grassroots, is that there began a conversation nationally, was early for Georgia, was a national leader with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And my constituent, Judge Janice Gordon, who's now in the State Court of DeKalb County, was part of the U.S. Attorney prosecution team that addressed child trafficking as a racketeering. And that criminal prosecution was very central in Georgia to really understanding the criminality of this, the criminality of trafficking of children. And the reason I bring that to the committee's attention is that that case did involve adult strip joint people in relation to the periphery of the racketeering trial that was prosecuted. The other point I wanted to make, Chairman Weldon is stepping out right now, but yesterday we clarified the issue, and I wanted the committee to come back to this, is that we do not need evidence to prove a direct link from the XYZ strip club on Buford Highway to an individual victim. The law requires us to show a nexus that is not individually proven, but is a reasonable nexus based on the general evidence. And I wanted to remind, your testimony is very helpful in that, to prove the general nexus between criminality and child trafficking, not the need for a specific individual. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here with us. I guess maybe proof for establishing something might be in the eye of the beholder, so let me just disagree a little bit with Representative Oliver and ask you a follow-up question or two, if I could. These searches that you did, that you were talking about you said the top strip clubs in Georgia or something like that, how many of those reviews that you found related to offering minors for trafficking purposes?
I did not find anything that says specifically that, this is a child at the strip club, and I think they would be far more careful than to blatantly say that. You'll see the terms like girl used. Some of them you can't read the review unless you join the site, unless you join the club, if you will. But some of them are pretty explicit at that as to why they are going to the strip club, that it is for a sexual encounter.
Well, sex is not illegal, right? I mean, I don't think.
Well,
No, we haven't made that illegal yet, this session, I don't think.
No, but at the strip club, you're not supposed to have sex at strip club.
It is.
Strip club, what did I say? So purchasing, right, the purchasing of sex, thank you.
Okay.
They're going specifically to get a woman, a man, whichever strip club they attend, or boy or girl, for sex. In some of their comments, in some of the person's comments.
Right, but none of those documents that you're talking about you have deal specifically with minors, is that right?
No, right. It doesn't say I had a 12-year-old at strip club, no.
And so with regard to, and I'm trying not to mix two different things here. We've got laws on the books. We've got things that make things crimes, that criminal enterprises can be prosecuted, but this bill imposes a tax on all businesses that may be operating lawfully. And so my question really is, how many of these adult entertainment establishments have been identified in some sort of a criminal enterprise in Georgia in, let's just say, the last year? For minors, I'm talking about, for minor sex trafficking.
And that's something we can certainly seek assistance from the GVI to see what their reports might show. We don't have that from this search as far as how many clubs in Georgia have been violated the minor sex trafficking law for minors. But we certainly could contact the GVI for that to see if they have any cases.
All right. And Representative Waits?
Ms. Kern?
Yes, ma'am.
We've worked a lot together. I just simply want to take a moment to thank you for your many years of tireless service in terms of advocating for children. As you know, our community has a number of strip clubs in it surrounding the airport, and so I just simply want to thank you for your tireless service.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Sharper?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you again for your input. Like I said yesterday, I'm all for us doing everything we can to make sure we're putting a handle on this trafficking, sex trafficking, things like that. And I also mentioned that we needed to do more on the prevention side of this, as far as going after the pimps. And we are looking at we're regulating this thing, like I said, with a fee. And I'm still on the point until I see something, I guess, more going towards why we need to make the good owners, I guess, suffer with the bad, because we're looking at anywhere from $5,000 to $21,000 as a fee. And as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, when I look at this, and if I know I'm doing everything that I possibly can in my business, extra security, extra everything, doing everything we can to make sure we don't have these activities going outside our particular business, because a lot of these young ladies that work here, a lot of them are of age. And a lot of the things that they're getting involved with, they're making these decisions themselves. It's not the owner of the particular business saying, okay, let's go out and do this. But I just see that a lot of these businesses that are doing what they're supposed to do legally are having to suffer with a fee because of some of the bad apples. That's just like in a business that I have, my party rental business, and you saw where they had bounce houses flying all over, different places. I wouldn't like it if the state or someone said, okay, Mr. Sharper, you guys are going to have to pay this particular fee because of these other bounce houses that was going in the air, when I did everything I can to make sure mine are staked down and give the proper directions. So I just think that we need to look at this close. I know we all want things to be better in Georgia. We want to tackle this prostitution, sex trafficking, all these things. But regulating these fees and just putting it on a blanket, everybody, to me that is unfair to our Georgia businesses that actually still pay taxes. We got to do something to protect them as well. Now, if you have ones that are guilty of it and you're going out there and saying, hey, look, you guys need to do something, you got a fee or you got some type of fine you can do. But a total blanket, we just need to be careful about doing this to this particular industry, because once we start tying things to certain industries, then we're going to have more fees going out to certain industries just because of some of the secondary effects, because the Constitution does give us the right to do that. But just because we have the right to do some things, we have to watch the way we do them. But that's just me. Okay.
And
But thank you.
Definitely, and I understand your point, because I know people who say, I've never had a car accident, so why do I have to buy car insurance?
Mhm.
Because it's applied, whether you are a car owner, if you are a car owner, you have to have car insurance, whether you've had an accident or not. And depending on the area you live in, you have to pay the fee that the insurance company says applies to that particular area.
Mhm.
And so while we're not saying by any stretch of the imagination that every adult entertainment business is engaging in child sex trafficking, what we are saying is that because of the type of businesses it is, because of the promotion of the business that it is, because of what it promotes, then it is more apt to have an incident of that type of sex trafficking based on experience, based on historical knowledge, based on human proclivity. And so, therefore, just like I have to pay car insurance, even though I'm a good driver, because of the industry they're in, they too will have to be held accountable.
Right. And I think, with that, you have those businesses, but like we say, we have the truck stops and we have the hotels. I think more sex go on in hotels than anywhere. Okay, so therefore, a lot of times you have hotels that are near those places that are doing the same thing.
And the state did provide a level of accountability to hotels and to truck stops as well with HB 141, and including the hotels and the truck stops and posting the National Human Trafficking Hotline.
Okay.
But the primary operation of a hotel is not to provide a sexual encounter.
And I don't think the primary...
Or to provide sexual gratification or a sexual stimulation, which is the definition of the adult entertainment business.
Right. Okay. And then those are legal businesses. But
Yes, absolutely. It's, insurance is legal as well.
Right. Okay. Right. And they have insurance too.
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Sharper. Let's see here. Representative Chandler?
Well, I probably ought to waive, but let's see if we can remember this, if I can. Representative Oliver, that statement you made, will you say it so I can understand it? And I've even forgotten what it was now. But
It was the...
yes, just say that so I will understand.
Representative Oliver? Hold on.
We had a very good discussion yesterday, led by one of the witnesses, about what is our standard for an imposition of a fee on an adult entertainment industry to be legal. And the standard is, on the case law that's established, is that you must show a nexus in general between adult entertainment and sexual criminality, sexual trafficking, sexual crimes like prostitutions that certainly overlap with prostitution of children. You do not have to prove, in order to have a constitutionally permissible fee on a strip club, that there was a specific girl underage who was trafficked by a specific adult entertainment industry. And we were going to have a follow-up today on the latest case that governs our laws over the adult entertainment industry about the Pink Pony in Brookhaven, which has been an ongoing. DeKalb County assessing a $250,000 fee against the Pink Pony every year. So there's some, whether that's a good or bad policy for a government to do, the Georgia Supreme Court has upheld that policy of a $250,000 fee on the Pink Pony annually.
Thank you, Representative Oliver. Representative Chandler. Representative Welch.
Thank you, Ms. Carn, for being here today. Let me ask you, the concept of sexual exploitation, it doesn't merely require that there be a sex act performed, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Isn't it a broader concept than just the sex act?
Yes, there, as someone stated earlier, the presence of coercion, threats, fraud, the promise of some type of security, promise of love, promise is much broader. It's a type of bonding that sometimes takes place that is akin to brainwashing, which has been compared to the Stockholm Syndrome. It can be dancing, it could be child pornography, so it doesn't have to be an actual sex act.
So when we're talking about exploiting children in particular, in relation to to the sense of sexuality, or to the sense of a sex act, or a objectifying of the female body, that can cover a broad array of things, whether it's photographs, if it's video, if it's dancing, if it's actual performance of a sex act. So the exploitation we're talking about can be a multitude of different crimes associated with the activity or the enticement of sexual behavior. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yes.
Good. And then the prostitution itself we understand prostitution is illegal in the state of Georgia, and prostitution is illegal regardless of the age of the person. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
All right. And then we were sitting. You had mentioned the Texas study that was done by the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office in the Texas report, and I think that someone else had mentioned that yesterday's testimony as well, and I presume we're going to get a copy of that to share, and if we can get that copy of that to give to the secretary of our committee, that would be good. But the Attorney General there did find that there was a level of criminal activity, inclusive of prostitution, in and around strip clubs, and that those, in a sense, were an attractive nuisance, if you will, an attractive a magnet for that criminal activity. Whether it happens in the facility or not is not the point. The point is that it attracts that activity. It seemed to me you were talking about these internet sites. The internet sites themselves, the web pages, I haven't seen them yet, but the chairman asked me to pull some of this up while you were talking, and it seems to me that if you pull up a website for the strip club industry, in a sense you're looking at a marketplace for those interested in some kind of I don't know what the word is, but a desire to view the female body or the male body, as it may be, and associated with that come up other activities that are sexual in nature and that are tied to it. So even in the marketplace of the internet, where a strip club may advertise, you will see corresponding advertisements and links to other activities that are sexual in nature. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that is fair to say.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, and may I just follow on give you the actual language from the Attorney General in Texas. It said in a 2011 Cardozo Arts and Entertainment Law Journal article examining the secondary effects associated with sexually oriented businesses, authors Weinstein and McCleary found that the mere presence of a sexually oriented business generally produced higher crime rates, regardless of its location or the nature of the enterprise.
Thank you. Representative Waits.
Mr. Chairman, I just simply want to highlight that there are two groups that tend to be exploited, and that is children and seniors. And I further believe that this is a very small price to pay, given the egregious nature of the acts that oftentimes take place. And further, it's my understanding that Atlanta leads the nation in terms of sex trafficking cases nationwide, is my understanding. So clearly
That
there's
was,
a need.
yeah, the Urban Institute study had a study of 8 cities, and so and this was a study about past years. But the FBI study, which was released in 2005, indicated that we were one of 14.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of that Georgia State article?
I have a snippet of it, but I can definitely get that to you. I can get the whole thing to you.
If you would, please, that'd be great. Thank you very much, Ms. Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Okay. Next on the list, I see that we have Senator Unterman has joined us. Thank you very much, Chair Lady. And we're still taking comment and evidence. And if you'd like to make a comment to the committee, we'll certainly appreciate your comment. And
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I certainly appreciate not only today but yesterday the forgiveness of me not being able to be here. I sent a message to the Speaker and to Speaker Pro Tem. I just saw her a few minutes ago and told them how gracious y'all have been. And I am just, and today, you know, it's hard to switch pallets from going from transportation and marijuana to human trafficking, but I'm going to try my very best.
sounds like an exciting
exciting lifestyle. Yeah, to keep it all in one brain is kind of difficult. But I know there's a lot of freshmen, and I know there's a lot of new people. And when I first presented this bill in the Senate, I had to refresh people's memory and also bring them up to date on where the state of Georgia is with human trafficking. And to me, human trafficking is modern-day slavery. That's exactly what it is. And whether you're talking about adults or children, and whether you're talking about girls or boys or women and men, it still is slavery in any terms. And as long as that's my fiduciary responsibility as an elected official, and I know it's going on, I intend to promote that agenda of getting rid of it. And we have been very successful in the state of Georgia. I have actually gone before other legislatures and testified about the gains that we've made. And before the National Conference of State Legislatures, you know, we have invited other legislators here to look at our safety net system to see the goals that we have accomplished. And Senate Bill 8 and Senate Resolution 7 is a further continuance of our fight against human slavery. And the General Assembly has done very well, and I have to say the House of Representatives has done a yeoman's job, because as Representative Oliver remembers, House 200 was the most historic bill that was passed about child sex trafficking just a few years ago, and Representative Ed Lindsay did a fabulous job. And these two particular resolution in the bill is a continuation of that historic representation that we're doing of trying to rid ourselves and trying to help the children of the state of Georgia. And as the representative said about senior citizens, these are the most vulnerable populations in our state, and that's what we should be doing. The first bill started out, and I'm just going to give just a brief synopsis. We started out in 2009 with Senate Bill 69, and that was the mandatory reporting of professionals who witnessed child abuse and child slavery. And people really didn't even know what it was then, and we didn't even know the road that we were going to be traveling down. But it came to my attention, and Representative Oliver was talking about that nexus of how you correlate adult entertainment and pornography and sexual shops into the correlation of whatever you want to call it, prostitution or trafficking of children. And at the very first study committee, it usually took me 3 weeks to get a study committee through the General Assembly. It took me 1 year to get a study committee on this particular topic. But at the very first study committee, and I don't have it with me, but I do have documentation, the FBI came and testified and said they talked about Stewart Avenue, which became Metropolitan Avenue. And this was confirmed by the Fulton County Juvenile Court judges, who were the premier people who saw this trend starting to happen, because they saw the juveniles coming through their system. And they saw these kids and what was damaging and hurting them. And they were really the first ones that put the flag up and said, hey, what's happening in our society here in the state of Georgia when you're using these children? But the FBI testified about the adult entertainment on Stewart Avenue then, and the direct correlation of the children that were down there, and the reason why the children were down there. And what they said, and is documented in that study committee, was that within a 1 mile perimeter around adult entertainment establishments, that you have a higher incidence of prostitution. And what you have is you have older women who may be 21 and older or 18 and older who are engaging in that business. But unfortunately, what these judges talked about was that you had younger children starting to go there because they were living on the street and they needed to make money. So they would go and hang out around where the older girls were hanging out, and they were basically cherry-picked first, that they were chosen first because they were more delectable. It was a higher demand. Our society has gone from not wanting a 21-year-old to wanting a 15-year-old to now wanting a 12-year-old to be able to abuse. And that was the very first time. And I thought to myself, how can this be happening? So I started looking into it. And I'm a native Atlantan. I'm from Georgia. I've been here my whole life. And I knew about Stewart Avenue. And I also knew that there was a trend that it was moving away. They changed Stewart Avenue to Metropolitan Avenue. And I knew there was a trend moving to Fulton Industrial Boulevard. And I knew that adult entertainment was opening up. And I'm here. I knew about the Pink Pony. I knew about when you had your engagement party, your wedding party, whatever, your bachelor party, you went to the Pink Pony. So these trends developed. And these Fulton County judges, I give them credit for bringing it up and saying, this is what's happening. So let's fast forward and go through what we've created, where we created the safety net. We've raised awareness. That's one of our main goals. We've changed law enforcement. We've changed juvenile court judges. We've educated them. We've educated other judges. We've put our money where our mouth is. We've put money in the budget for the GBI, for these task force. We've educated local law enforcement. We now have sting operations. We are delivering therapeutic services. We have a great governor who had the foresight to put this money in the Governor's Office of Children and Family that created the safety net to deliver the therapeutic services. It was also testified in our 2 study committees that we've had on this topic that it costs up to $80,000 a year to basically de-brainwash a child, to try and rehabilitate them. When we first started out, there was only one nonprofit in the state of Georgia, and that was called A Future Not a Past. And they were very fortunate to get the first juvenile justice grant, a federal grant, to help them get started because of those juvenile court judges. And now I can ring off about 25 NGOs, and I know y'all have heard testimony from them. We've made tremendous gains, but we cannot stop here. We cannot stop on the laurels of Ed Lindsay and House Bill 200. We continue to have to push forward. Has it been difficult? Oh my gosh. When I first went to my caucus meeting and my caucus members said, no, Renee, you're not going to talk about 50-year-old men having sex with 12-year-old girls on the Senate floor. You're not going to do it. And I did do it. And now look where we are. We're one of the leaders in the nation. When you're talking about that nexus, and I think that's very important, I'm glad you brought that topic up. And how do you rationalize putting a fee and subsidizing basically $1 billion of industry, an industry that promotes sex, that promotes the exploitation? How do you create and how do you rationalize that? Well, you know what? I've been a mayor and I've been a county commissioner. I can rationalize it real easy because I was in the fastest growing county in the nation, Gwinnett County, for 4 years in a row when I was a county commissioner. And we put in sewer impact fees. We put in stormwater fees for stormwater runoff because we had new growth to fund the growth of the system. The state of Georgia puts in money for $1 for recycling tires. I mean, there's all kind of constitutional amendments of dedicated funds. And all I'm asking for in this constitutional amendment, why shouldn't a billions of dollars industry help the state of Georgia? Like I said before, we're already putting our money where our mouth is. We're funding that safety net. We fund it through DHS. We fund it through the governor's office. We fund it through DFACS. We fund it through DCH, through the Medicaid program. We fund it through the education, through the Board of Education, through the State Board of Education. So why shouldn't an industry that is promoting this step up to the plate and help us and assist us and have some skin in the game with us? Why should we be the burden? Why should the taxpayers of Georgia, who the majority of them do not participate in it? That's the cost of doing business. When you go into business and you're in the adult entertainment business, why shouldn't you fund some of the problems that you're causing within a mile of where your business is? Why shouldn't you? Why should it be the rest of the taxpayers having to fund that burden? That's how I rationalize it. And then I rationalize it when I sit down and I talk to the very first victims of Angela's house that we had in Palmetto, Georgia. And I went there, and I was a Grady nurse. I've seen it all. I've pulled the knives out of people's backs in the emergency room at Grady. And when I went to Angela's house, and I was expecting to see 17, 18, 19-year-old girls, and I got there, and I saw shoes that were this big, that were still adolescent shoes instead of seeing adult-sized shoes. Why should we not step up to the plate and help these kids? And that's why since 2009 I have been on a mission. And whether these bills pass or not, I don't know. And I know it takes a lot of courage. And I know that we have been one of the leaders in the state, in the nation, that we have been in the top 14 with Los Angeles, with Las Vegas, with New York, with Miami of child sex trafficking. And I know we've made great gains, but we cannot stop here. We have to continue to move on. And I'm just asking this committee to please help us move on. And this is the direction we need to go on. I believe a constitutional amendment will pass overwhelmingly. We have an email list of over 20,000 emails of people that are interested in working on this topic. The citizens of Georgia care about it, and they want to continue to do something about it. But I'm just saying, I feel like these adult entertainment establishments, and I have been to them, I have met with some of their owners, I know there are children working in their clubs. I think they should step up to the plate.
Thank you very much, Senator. Is there any questions for the Senator from the committee? Representative Quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator, thank you for all your work. And I don't think that there's anybody who's got questions about the bill or concerns about the funding mechanism that doesn't believe that we shouldn't try to figure out a way to help these children. I don't think that's what it's about. And just for the benefit of the rest of the committee, and as a point of personal privilege, one of the problems here under the Gold Dome is that nobody has any institutional memory sometimes, as you're talking about.
Right.
But these folks may not know that you were one of the, maybe a handful of senators who stood up for the child support guidelines that we've talked about in this committee in 2004 and 2005 and stood up for Georgia's children then. And so I'll again say thank you for that. And we all know where your heart is and your hard work is in this. But I am concerned about the chosen funding mechanism for this. Mm-hmm. Not that I don't want to help try to find some money to deal with the issues that need to be dealt with. So you mentioned the findings and testimony that were summarized in the reports of the study committees that from these past bills and past efforts. the testimony that you mentioned about, specifically about the children, is that contained in the study committee reports, if you recall?
I have not reread those study committee minutes in a very long time, but I do have them, I believe, in my office at home and in my office here, and this weekend I can get them. There's been 2 study committees that were done, and I can pull those and go through them again and reread them and try and find it.
And as an aside, that pulling, the skill of pulling knives out of people's backs probably came in handy here.
Every day. Every day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Not just in the back either. But can I just elaborate? You know, since we started in 2009, you know, one of my main jobs in the Senate, and I'm very, very grateful to work with Senator Jack Hill, and we have put millions of dollars into that safety net system, into creating it, and through the Governor's Office of Children and Families originally. And like I said, Governor Deal has done a fabulous job. But you know what? What happens if you don't have a dedicated fund source and you have a different governor that really doesn't care about it? You know, I have been here all these years, and I have written those budgets, and I have protected that money, just like we're talking about transportation and taking money from here to yonder and putting it here to yonder. Well, unfortunately, when you come to victims and children and the elderly, people like to take that money. And if there's not a bulldog there protecting it, it gets taken away. And that's one of my impetus, that we have created a great safety net system, and it needs to be protected. And how it can be protected is by having dedicated money, because a lot of us aren't going to be here. Representative Aller and I have been here a long time, and we have protected these children. But it ain't going to happen forever unless there is a dedicated source, just like I'm talking about with these recycling the tires. Every tire gets $1. And that's a good thing, because I've used that before to clean up a backyard that I couldn't get cleaned up when I was a mayor, and it cost $20,000. But what I'm saying is, if you're going to continue those therapeutic services that cost so much money and helping these kids, and this isn't going to get better. The cultural change is to abuse more and more children, because our culture is going downhill. The little girls don't look like the little girls anymore. Used to, a little girl that was 12 years old looked like a 12-year-old. Now a 12-year-old looks like a 15 or a 16 years old. And that's what's happening in our culture. And to be able to protect that and to use that money and to have supplemental money, that money's not always going to be there. And that's what I said, the industry that helps promote it and produce it, they should have the skin in the games.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Sharper.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Just looking at this, with your going out and talking with some of the owners and people like that, how did they pretty much react to maybe the 5,000 fee and the percentage?
Let me just tell you about my first instance. You know, I've actually had a lot of people threaten me over this, because these are very powerful people that own these adult entertainment. That's the very first thing I found out. Mm-hmm. They're very, very powerful. They're not the typical business people that you and I think about. They're very, very powerful. And I remember I was on the 4th floor of the Capitol in my office, and the woman that happened to own Strokers, I think it's called, in DeKalb County, I believe it was in Stone Mountain, and she brought me a stack, and I still have that with those study committee reports of the girls that worked in her establishment. And I was just amazed, because I thought it was like 4 or 5 girls that stood up there and danced. Well, the other night on our Unholy tour, we went by the Pink Pony, and the girl, Cassie, that runs For Sarah, who's a former stripper, she told me that during the day they have 80 to 90 dancers on the floor during the day. I'm like, oh my gosh, how many they have at night when it's busy? And I have not talked to them about this particular bill, but when I talked to the woman with Strokers, and they're totally opposed to it. Totally opposed. And they say the same thing I think I heard you say about the cost of business. But I'm saying, why should we're paying for their cost of business. We're paying the $80,000 a year. I'm talking about that's just the physical cost in our state budget. What about the compassionate cost of taking care of these kids? That's the dollar value, and then you add in the humanity, the compassionate value. You put those two together. I don't care what that woman told me. I don't care that she told me she didn't like it. I don't care. She showed me their driver's license, and I've got that, of every person that worked in her club. And I can guarantee you can go to these clubs, and they may say they're 18 years old, but anybody can go and get a false driver's license and say they're 18 years old and they're 16 years old. I got a problem with 16-year-olds working as strippers.
Mm-hmm.
But I really don't care what they think about their cost. That's the cost of doing business. And when they're making billions of dollars in the sex industry, I ain't got a problem about taxing them or causing a fee on them. I don't have a problem at all.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Sharper. Representative Welch.
Senator Underman, I want to personally thank you for the hard work and the clear passion that you have for this issue. Not only Senate Bill 8 and then Senate Resolution 7, which you have taken the lead on and drafted these measures and passed by, 63?
It was
63
there
to
was
3?
one vote against it. One vote out of the Senate was against it. One senator.
Passing that measure in the Senate and taking testimony, I think we had 2 days of testimony that were presented before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
That's right.
And you presented your testimony, and others gave testimony. Many of the similar faces that we're seeing here and additional faces that were not there are here today to give testimony. In addition, testimony has been given through Representative Estration's measure of 244 before the House Non-Civil Duty Subcommittee. This has gotten so much review and such a long history of consideration that I am impressed by your level of knowledge, your passion, your dedication to this over the many years that you've served in the General Assembly, and I appreciate your good judgment with respect to how we're going to go about collecting revenues. In my mind, I look at this assessment, this fee that's in SB 8, as being a criminal nuisance assessment.
Right.
It is attracting individuals who engage in a criminal activity. In particular, what we're looking at is prostitution, which is the in prostitution of children. While that, in the most horrible sense of what could be happening, the deprivation of someone's life, dignity, psychologically, the deprivation of their health. We haven't even touched on, and we should have asked Ms. Lippitt to talk about the health impacts. What actually happens to a young female that has been engaged, other than SDS? The physical, long-term physical impacts, the increased likelihood of other ailments that result from being exploited over and over again. We haven't even touched on those. I know that you covered them in the Senate committees, and I think we have some documents that we can provide the committee later on that. But I just want to applaud you for all the effort, all the information that you've put out there, all the discussions you've had, and taking the leadership role on this measure. And I want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And I have a list of that I read on the Senate floor of people and groups that have worked on this issue, and it's absolutely phenomenal. And I'll be glad. Do you want me to read that list? Can I read it just for 2 seconds?
Sure.
First of all, it was Judge Nina Hickson. She was one of the first juvenile court judges and all of the juvenile court judges in Fulton County. Kathy McCullough, she was with A Future Not a Past. The Governor's Office of Children and Family. Janet Barocas, Mrs. Deal. The Georgia Junior Leagues. They have been phenomenal all over the state. the Georgia Rotary Organization, GABWA, the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys. I always joke with them. I go to as many meetings as they have. They have helped me out so much. The Interfaith Children's Movement, the Attorney General, the GBI Director, the Street Grace, which is a compilation of over 90 churches, Reverend Scott Weimer, Reverend Spinrod, Pastor Norwood, Voices for Children, college campus organizations. I cannot tell you how many college campuses I have been to in the state of Georgia where young people, and I ask them, why are you doing this? Why do you have campus organizations against human trafficking? They said, well, first of all, this is our playmates. This is the kids we went to school with. And second of all, this might be my brother. This might be my sister that I'm looking after. But all of the major universities in the state now have human trafficking organizations. So when we first started out, I couldn't even get 50 people to the first lobby day, and it was mostly the secretaries here at the Capitol that came to the first lobby day. And now when we have a lobby day, we have 600 people. And it's just phenomenal how the movement has grown and how Georgia has gotten national attention because we've stepped up to the plate. When we first started out, we had a D rating. A D is in dog with the National Clearinghouses from the Polaris Group in Arlington, Virginia. And now we're up to a B. If we pass this legislation, is it a true safe harbor? No. But it will bring our rating up. And that's my goal, is to bring our rating up.
Thank you. Representative Sharper, briefly.
Yeah, very brief. I'll be very brief. You know, I've had a hard time with this, right?
Yes, sir.
But I've been in the medical field 25 years. I've seen some of this stuff, okay? Mm-hmm. My biggest thing is a lot of times we follow the money and we see what's going on. But I want to make sure if we pass this and we're taking this much money for this particular purpose, that not only we use that money, especially for the safe harboring of treating our young people, but also working that much harder on the prevention side of this thing. Because we throw money after a lot of things, but then there's still nothing done a lot of times. And so I think that if we're going to do something like this, let's make sure we hold everybody accountable that's involved, the people taking care of the people, the prevention side, do everything we can so I can feel better once we make something happen with it.
Well, can I answer that?
Yeah.
The good thing I feel about that is on the prevention side is that the NGOs have stepped up to the plate. And the government can't be all things for all people. And they are supplanting the money that we provide with the volunteer services. And they have done a fabulous job. And I'll give you one good example. I could give you many examples, but one good example is Street Grace, who stepped up to the plate with the Board of Education, the State Board of Education, and in conjunction with the PTOs of educating children how not to become victims in the school system. It's very difficult to get into the boards of education and start talking about sex. But they have been very good working in a collaborative contract agreement of doing this. And they have started, I think, about a year and a half ago. But that's one good example of prevention. Because if you teach a child how not to be a victim, and that's the goal. That's part of the goal. But that's one good example.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, I don't see any further questions from the committee. Well, just one. Representative Comer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thank you for your work on this bill. And there are a lot of things that I really like about the bill, but I have concern about the funding mechanism as well, and maybe a little bit different than what I've heard from other members. I heard you say that the people you talk to, and by the way, let me say this also, I appreciate you going to these places and doing your investigation, because these are places you wouldn't catch me. Yes. And I appreciate you doing what others of us just can't do. So thank you for that. And what you said was, when you went to these places, you found that the folks who are the owners here are not your typical business owners, and you said they are very, very powerful people. And one of the best insurances we have against very, very powerful people getting more powerful and trampling the rights of others is our Republican form of government. We have an ability through our system to use checks and balances to make sure that we don't have a consolidation of great power in a limited, one person or very few people, while the masses have their rights trampled. I bring that up because there are two things about this, the dedicated funding piece and then also the governance piece that cause me concern. One is that if you do the dedicated funding piece, the result of that is that you are tying the hands of future legislators, future policymakers, so that they can't make adjustments to what they're doing. And I understand that that may be a goal of the process, is to make it harder for that money to be diverted to some other priority. But that is an important function of the elective process, is to give the voice of future generations the ability to decide what are priorities for them and not be stuck with whatever the priority was for us in 2015. The other thing is, in particular with regard, and I'm looking now at beginning on about line 203 and going on.
Can I just answer that before I
Sure.
forget? Because
Yeah.
I'm really, really tired. It's Friday.
Sure, I understand.
First of all, let me clarify about what I said about them being powerful. First of all, you have to understand a lot of these are franchisees and franchises of adult entertainment facilities. And they're groups, and they have a group here, and they have a business here. It's kind of like McDonald's, same thing, and that's why they're so powerful. And I just want to clarify that so that you understand what I'm talking about. Some of them are the little peep shows. I can take you over on Cheshire Bridge Road,
I'd rather you didn't.
where they got they've got the nastiest of the nasty, or over on over on Cheshire Bridge Road, and those are the worst. And I could take you to Chamblee and Dorville, where the Asian community, massage parlors and that type thing, that are really bad. So I just wanted to clarify about why these people are powerful, is because they're conglomerates. And they're also tied in to Las Vegas, New York, and other venues. So that's what makes them powerful. The other thing is this legislation was modeled after, directly, the Brain and Spinal Injury Trust Fund. And that's what we copied it after. And if you've been here a long time like I have, and you've seen the success of the Brain and Spinal Injury Trust Fund, and have seen the work that they've done, they have a dedicated fund that is collected off of the court fees. They're very low down on the ticket. They don't get as many as, the prioritized ones that are at the top of the ticket, but they do get that money. And I know that kind of system works. And that's where you're calling about transparency and accountability of these trust funds. And that's why I copied it, and that's exactly where it came from, was the Brain and Spinal Injury Trust Fund.
Thank you. And I may have missed the part where somebody else talked about transparency and accountability, but that's the other part that I have some concern about. Looking again at lines 203 and moving on, line 204, that's the dedicated funding piece, but then line 207 says the commission may authorize the disbursement of available money from the fund. So, of course, there's no legislative oversight of that process of dispersing the money. And what I've got further concern in lines, beginning lines 219, well, let me say this. Anybody who was on the House floor this morning knows that I really appreciate our governor, and I have the utmost trust that he would do this, given this power, he'd do it correctly. But I have a concern that we would give this kind of power to the office of the governor at any given time, even now, because what we're doing is we're essentially giving to the office of the governor in the future a separate pool of money that he or she can supervise, manage, and spend without any legislative oversight. And to support that point, I would point out that you have an 8-member commission. 4 of the members are appointed by the governor, and one of them is a permanent member who's I guess it's the director of DFACS. But then the chairperson of CJCC, the commissioner of DBHDD, and the director of DFACS all have an additional appointment to make up the 8 members. Problem is, every one of those people, those commissioners, are appointees who serve at the pleasure of the governor. So in effect, you're giving the governor every vote on this commission who is going to decide how this money is spent. And that is where I see the risk of allowing a small group of very powerful people, or putting all this power in the hands of one governor to spend this money as he or she sees fit in their discretion, and with zero legislative oversight year over year. And that's where I really have a philosophical problem with the way this particular funding is working. And I know you're going to respond. And one other point, side point, and that is, and I think this will be a question you can answer for me. Back up in line 200, you are saying that the fund commission would be assigned to DFACS. And my question is, why wouldn't we assign them administratively if we create this commission? Why would we not assign them to the CJCC, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, since that is in fact a place where we typically see grant money coming in and going out? In fact, we had legislation this year to codify the current practice, which is getting DFACS out of the business of handling grant money and putting it all over into CJCC because they're more equipped and better adept at doing that. So it's two issues.
Okay, I'll be glad to answer those. And like I said, my brain is kind of mush. I had, I started at 1 o'clock yesterday with medical marijuana, and we ended up at 7 o'clock last night. But I will answer this. Okay, first of all, let me make sure, and I appreciate your questions, let me make sure I got the questions right. When we first started out, we started putting the money in the Governor's Office of Children and Family, and they became the regulatory oversight. And I'm sure that you've heard from Heather Stockton, who now works for Georgia Cares, and there has been an evolution over the years as we have refined this safety net system. So when we first started it, we started putting money in the budget, but we had to have a regulatory arm of it, and it was in the Governor's Office of Children and Family. And only recently, I believe it's 2 years ago, when the Governor's Office came to me and said, Renee, what do you think about changing it and putting it in CJCC? And I said, I really don't have a problem with that. And this is when we were limping along and starting a brand new infrastructure. As it became more refined and it became more about what it was doing, I didn't have a problem moving it to CJCC. And when you say there's no legislative oversight, I disagree wholeheartedly, because I'm the one that sits on the second floor down there and writes the budget and stays here on the weekend and does the conference committees. That is the legislative oversight, because we are the one that is allocating the money. And I understand.
My understanding is that we would not be under this provision because this is a dedicated fund, and it says
Right,
in
it
207 the
goes-
commission may authorize the disbursement
That's
of
right.
available money from the fund. So
Gentlemen
not-
will suspend.
Thank you. I'm just making sure we're on the same page.
Suspend.
I'm just,
Let her respond to the question, and then you can, after she's responded, then pose another question.
I
Thank you.
think what I'm trying to do is to give you the evolutionary process of how we started out and how we have had legislative oversight and how I think we're going to continue to have legislative oversight. And I equate this commission, and I never would have had power usurped from the legislature. I never would have written this if I didn't feel like I still would be able to have control, or whoever else is after me that is doing the same thing in the budgetary process. And I think you can equate this to the same principles that we have with the Georgia Ports Authority or the Georgia Regions. We allocate, we have board members, we have those on Department of Community Health, we have appointed board members who allocate billions of dollars. They may allocate it, but we're actually the ones, we're the elected officials, we're the ones that write the budget. When you write the budget, you're setting the policy. Policy comes after money. and it's up to us to do that transparency and do that accountability. And I don't think we're giving it away by giving it to that commission. And I could go on about other, the Senate, unlike the House, confirms about 400 appointments that we hadn't done it this year yet, but we vote on every member that's appointed. So whenever the governor appoints someone, it has to be confirmed by the Senate. And these boards that I'm talking about and this commission would be confirmed by the Senate. So I think it's the process that government is in, and that's the way we've done it. And this evolutionary process is just being refined, just like the laws have been refined, just like we've progressed from House Bill 200 to these bills. And that infrastructure has been refined all the way from being in the Governor's Office of Children and Family to now that we've been so successful that Heather Stockdale is a nonprofit that has a direct correlation, a direct contract with the state. I mean, what better could you ask for where the state is not the sole responsibility anymore, that we have volunteer money coming in from the NGOs helping the state to accomplish these goals. To me, that's setting the bird out of the cage. We're no longer solely responsible. We have identified these children, and yes, we're willing to step up to the plate and we're taking care of them. We're taking them off the street, but now we have the nonprofit world helping us. We're not the only sole proprietor of it, and the taxpayers don't have to foot the full dollar. They can foot the 50-cent part of the dollar now and get the nonprofit money, and I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely. Representative Crum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I'm misunderstanding here, but the way I read the bill and the amendment was that the money raised through the procedure set out here would be dedicated funds that are predetermined to be going to support the Safe Harbor for Sexually Exploited Children Fund. Is that not the case?
Yes, it is, and I don't think I answered your second question. I meant to answer it. This fund and this commission, I put it under DFACS because, as you know, and this governor has had the foresight to recognize, and Representative Aller and I have worked on this on the Child Fatality Review. He's had the foresight to put line after line after line after line of things like 300 new social workers to be able to do a better job, and the reformation of our system, that we have been at the bottom of the barrel in the United States of taking care of children. And you know what's happened with our DFACS. And putting this in DFACS it was sensible that that's where it would go versus CJCC. As we were talking about prevention measures, CJCC is more of correction measures. And this is wraparound services. That's what DFACS does, is wraparound services for children, and that's how we'll do a better job.
May I continue?
Representative Cumberland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't want to get too far afield on this, but you said that Georgia is now, the taxpayer is no longer the sole proprietor of organizations like Georgia Cares. Can you give me an idea of what the Georgia Cares budget, how much their total budget is?
I know when we first started out, I can't remember, and I would be afraid to go on record of stating, but the Senate Budget Office, I'll be glad to ask them to pull those records of what we started out with the Governor's Office of Children and Families. And the hard part now is when the governor asked to start putting it in CJCC, is that we're no longer in one silo. When we first started out, we were in one silo. But now, when I read off where we are now, we're in many silos. We're in DFACS, we're in DHS, we're in DCH, and we're in the Education Department. So it's very hard to extrapolate all those dollars. and also because you're doing wraparound services, all those dollars are collected in those different budgets. And that's what makes one of my jobs so hard in trying to make sure that that money stays there and protecting those children.
I just wanted to know how much the
And I said I would get it for you.
yeah,
If I could, just a second, if you suspend, I believe that Ms. Stockdale may have a comment, and very briefly, could you address that, Ms. Stockdale?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I'm the executive director of Georgia Care. So if you want to know specifically about our budget, and I shared some of this yesterday, the total amount, as Senator Unterman was referencing, previously in 2009, 991 to 680 were isolated in the state's budget from TANF funds, and those were previously, as Senator Unterman said, directed to the Governor's Office of Children and Families, and we received, Georgia Cares received $750,000 of those funds. Since things have transferred to CJCC, we have received $718,000 of the 991 in TANF funds, and then they have also helped us tap into the Victims of Crime Act dollars that they hold as the state authorizing body, and we've received over $100,000 of those monies. The rest of our budgets, we submit grants from foundations, we solicit private donations, do fundraising, and apply for other federal grants directly. So none of those funds that I mentioned are actually state funds, they're federal funds that the state has, as Senator Unterman said, protected and allocated each year since 2009 for those specific purposes.
And I'll be glad to get those from Senate budget.
And if you could move along this
just
right
one
here.
question.
Last
I'm
one.
done.
Last one.
Can you tell me what your total receipt was for the most recent year? That's what I'm asking. How much have you taken in for your full budget for the most recent year? Total amount.
For my total
Yes.
agency budget or my contract with CJC?
Just your total, Georgia Cares total annual budget for the most recent year.
Our total budget is right over $1 million.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Representative Oliver.
I kind of hate to jump in between these two individuals here, but I think it's an interesting philosophical question about whether an independent body that's mandated publicly to do evaluations is better, or is more transparent or less transparent. The Spinal Injury Fund has done a very good job and is transparent. It's no Green Door Committee in the back room acting well for most purposes. It's a transparent group. And other independent created funds have not done well. No transparency, blown out of the water. The conversation I'm continuing about the Jilders Trust Fund. So it's a philosophical question. What's more transparent? What is more likely to be apolitical and more directly focused on services with evaluations? That's a philosophical difference. I think she's right. I think there's more transparency, less politics, and more expertise in an independent body. But I think it's obviously a fair argument.
Representative Spencer.
Thank you for bringing the bill. It's obviously generated a lot of discussion and sort of shifting gears just a little bit.
Sure.
Speaking of, the conversation's been about powerful people and the cost of this. I know your bill has similar language to House Bill 17, and
Right.
we've been in several discussions about that. And one of the things that our country was founded on is that we have the right to a civil court or jury system, which is that one of the backgrounds behind that was to allow people who were powerful and people who are subjected to that power have a right to challenge them in court because they have the means and the resources to suppress these people's voices. They have the means and resources to keep them quiet. And so that was because the king in England could do that. And so what we have is the Seventh Amendment. And I say that because the language in your bill that mirrors mine and House Bill 17, and we've talked about this. I
I believe that we need to go further, and you and I have had that conversation. Why is it that, can you tell me why is it that this current statute of limitations that has been increased just only 2 years is where the Senate wanted to go with that? Can you share that?
Chair would like to just clarify the question. The question is, and I'm going to modify the question a little bit. The question is, can you explain the public policy that you're bringing forth in your bill regarding the statute of limitations that's contained therein?
Mhm.
And we'll deal with the other issues on Monday.
Okay.
If you would just make a comment on that.
There has been many attempts to change the statute of limitations, and we're a very conservative body, and the Senate is very conservative, and the 2 years was what I agreed upon. Would I like to have it more? Yes, but this is what I could get through the Senate. I think it's realistic. I think it's a step forward. I think it's a baby step, and I'm agreeable to it. Will I come back and change it? I don't know. But this is what I could get through the Senate, and I feel comfortable with it. And I think it would pass in the House of Representatives. I came from the House of Representatives. I think it would pass there, and I feel good about it.
Representative Raffensperger.
Yes. This should be a simple question.
I can use a simple one.
Thank you for bringing this bill forward. I guess on page or line 224, the commission shall consist of 8 members. I come from a city council background where we had 6 council members and the mayor voted. So I assume that this commission is going to make votes at some time to decide what their policy will be. Will you end up with a situation where you have 4-4? Like, why not 7? Why not 9? 8 just seems. What was your envisioning of this? Because you say later that they can set up their own rules, and I'm just wondering if we want to consider an odd number.
I don't remember, but I think, and maybe legislative council can help me, but I think it was a chairman. I'm not sure if the chairman of the commissioner of defects, I would have to reread it, is the chairman of it. But if it was 8 members, I was assuming that it would be 7 members with the chairman not voting. So it says 7 of the members shall serve for a term of 2 years. The director shall be a permanent member of the commission. I can change that. That's no problem. I agree with you. I served as a mayor, and I had 6 council members, and I never voted unless there was a tie. But I'm amenable.
Okay, thanks.
That's a good question. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Maybe legislative council could answer it. I don't know.
And we'll get into that on Monday when we'll be in the breast of the committee. Okay. Senator Underman, thank you so much.
Thank
this bill brings forth great issues to this committee and to the General Assembly that must be addressed. And it is the firm intention of the chair, and I believe this committee, to work through any issues that are involved in this, and first become thoroughly familiar with the information, and to work with you and the Senate to put forth, and the full House of Representatives to put forth a bill that we all can agree is something that's worthy of Georgia, and we certainly appreciate the work you've done, and thank you for being here today, and appreciate the work you did yesterday on transportation and medical marijuana, and again today, and coming here.
Thank you, and I'll be glad to work with y'all on amendments, and I will look this weekend for those study committees. And again, I appreciate it, and believe me, you come before the health committee, and I'll wait 2 days on you too, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's not a problem. Thank you very much, Senator Arnold. We have some other folks that we're going to hear from today. Leaf Coolin. That's cool. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cool. Appreciate you being here today.
Sure.
Now, you're from
CNN. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm the executive editor of the CNN Freedom Project, which is our network's initiative to fight human trafficking around the world. So I had planned to tell you quite a bit about what we've done and
Please do.
some of the places I've been to, but I know it's late, so I'll probably get right to the point. 4 years ago, we started the Freedom Project after seeing some of the stories that are taking place in other parts of the world: Cambodia, the Philippines, Eastern Europe, West Africa, places that are typically thought of as being somewhat developing, poorer nations. It was commonly thought of as a problem of poverty. What we've uncovered here working in the United States is something that's been truly shocking to me. I've seen quite a number of cases of human trafficking here in Atlanta. And one of the projects we're working on now is a project we're doing with Jada Pinkett Smith, Will Smith's wife. She's an actress and activist in her own right. It's a project we're calling Roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, The New American Slavery. And I brought a short clip of it so I could show the committee as a point of reference for some of the things that are happening. And I can talk a little bit about what I've seen in the strip clubs as well after this.
Thank you.
So I'm going to stretch the limits of my technological ability. Try to get this to work.
You did say you're from CNN, right?
I know, but I'm a producer. I don't actually touch anything. All right, let's see how it goes.
A person that sells children is it's evil.
It's just like somebody paying for a slave. My perpetrator owns me, and the John's paying for me.
It was nothing to wake up with black eyes and 4 or 5 ribs bruised, broken.
I thought it was important to partner with CNN because this has been a focus of CNN, the Freedom Project, and focusing on trafficking. The whole purpose of this project is bringing a more refined understanding of what trafficking is. I think people feel like there are other people that come from other parts of the world through the airports that constitutes for trafficking, that we're like a pit stop and then they go somewhere else. No. Our children here in the United States are being trafficked.
He usually did it out of the back of the barber shop. Mailman came in and paid their money to him, came back there to me.
We are becoming more aware of this epidemic and becoming more aware of what is needed to uproot it. We all have a part to play in this.
So all of that documentary was filmed here in the state of Georgia.
Sorry. Children is.
I knew it was going to get me somehow.
It's evil.
It's just like somebody paying for a slave. My perpetrator.
I should do it. So we talked to more than 24 victims, all young girls underage here in Atlanta. The girl who was
under what age?
Under the age of 18. We talked to other girls. Actually, I should clarify that. We talked to girls who are over the age of 18 but had been victimized. For example, the girl who we talked about being trafficked out of a barber shop, she was 14 when that abuse happened. We talked to, you saw a lot of the video from on the streets that was filmed at Fulton Industrial Boulevard. We went to a lot of the strip clubs in the neighborhood. Actually, I should say that those strip clubs allowed us in. They knew who we were, what we were doing. They also allowed us backstage, like to talk with the girls, and those strip clubs I can be fairly certain did not have an actual problem with human trafficking. They had the signs posted that if you've seen anything that looks suspicious, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. But I will say that in the course of the documentary, we talked to 3 girls who were all trafficked out of strip clubs. One was 9 years old, out of Baltimore. She was sent to Living Water for Girls, the rehabilitation center here. There was another girl who was over the age of 18, but she was addicted to. She was given drugs in the strip clubs, and they were the strip club owners or the managers acted as her pimps. So she would get to work, and she would have 3 Johns lined up, paying customers, where she would go in the back and have sex with them. And then the third one, which was very interesting to me, was a girl who was working in the strip clubs when she was 17 years old. And she was engaging in prostitution as well. She didn't say that the club managers were her pimps, but she was facilitating those interactions in the strip clubs. And what's interesting, and I don't know if this, is something that really parlays to what this hearing is about, but the girl who was abused at 17, by the time she was 23, she was trafficking girls herself, and she was convicted under federal human trafficking charges. They abused over 40. Her and a co-conspirator abused over 40 girls. She was making $32,000 a week doing so, and there was horrible abuse that took place in terms of beatings and binding the girls and throwing them in the back of trucks or trunks of cars and driving them to Alabama to get rid of them. All of this is taking place in the documentary. You'll see all this when it comes out next month. So I just thought it would be interesting to show a small clip of this and give you firsthand knowledge of what's taking place and what I've seen.
If you wouldn't mind taking a question or two.
Sure.
Representative Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn, for coming. Appreciate you being here and waiting patiently. Is it my understanding that when we're talking about trafficking girls, a pimp may pick up, a trafficker may pick up a girl in one state, bring them to another, and vice versa. So one could pick up a girl in Atlanta or anywhere in Georgia, for that matter, and then transport them somewhere else as an effort to maybe minimize the identity, make it more difficult to track the girl for trafficking purposes. Did you notice any of that, or is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it happens in a number of different ways. You certainly see pimps taking girls, transporting them across state lines. That's frequently what they get charged with is transporting a girl for purposes of prostitution.
And isn't that also a Mann Act violation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you also see pimps acting locally and keeping the girls, under their thumb. We followed the Internet Crimes Against Children unit out of DeKalb County for the past year, and when they do their raids, we literally see them go exit by exit across I-285, making raids and rescues of these girls, all underage girls, taking part in prostitution. The vast majority of them have a pimp. We also have a story where a young 17-year-old girl had come from Detroit to Atlanta on a Greyhound bus, the bus ticket paid for by her trafficker, and she had a tattoo on her wrist. And the detective told us it was the same tattoo that they've seen many times in the area, and it's likely a brand by the local pimp.
I just want to say thank you for what you're doing, what CNN is doing to bring attention to this heinous crime, and also to give the victims a voice, an opportunity to stand up for themselves. When they were defenseless before, they're no longer defenseless. And this medium of producing this documentary and allowing it to be shared with the world is going to be the megaphone that helps hopefully pull other girls out from the darkness. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think the takeaway from me for this documentary is I've been to Cambodia and the red light districts and the Philippines and all of these places. And I always assumed, I mean, we knew that there was a problem of human trafficking in the state of Georgia and you know, in the entire United States. And Georgia, I would say, is one of the leading states with regards to taking a proactive step on this. And that's also part of the documentary, is that there are dedicated civic leaders who are trying to uncover this problem. And it's like anything, when you look for it, you start to find it. But if you're not looking for it, you don't see it. So it's a bit unfortunate that Georgia actually gets a rep for being a hub for human trafficking, when it's really, I think that there is a problem, but it is also a hub for really engaged citizenry who are taking the steps necessary to try to curtail this.
Mr. Coolum, in your research and work on this topic, have you seen in Georgia where victims of human trafficking have been caught in our safety net and pulled out of that life?
Yeah, actually, I'll tell you guys a really interesting story, which I think you guys will like in particular. So there, Senator Unterman had mentioned the Unholy Tour, that bus tour that lawmakers have taken to learn more about the issue of human trafficking. So the end of the story, we're following Sergeant Kennedy out of the DeKalb County Internet Crimes Against Children Unit. A woman who was watching the WSB story about the Unholy Tour, she called for Sarah after that program. She had never heard of human trafficking before, but she had a granddaughter who had gone missing 7 weeks earlier. People thought she was a runaway. She called the authorities. They said she wasn't a priority because she, had a habit of running away. But this grandmother saw the case, saw the story that was done on WSB, thought, well, maybe my granddaughter was trafficked. She didn't know what that was, hadn't heard of it, but she called for Sarah, and within half an hour, within 30 minutes, For Sarah had found the girl for sale on Backpage, 14-year-old girl, and 2 days later, the Human Trafficking Task Force in the state of Georgia had found the girl. She was on her way to meet a client near the airport. And inside the car that Sergeant Kennedy and the task force, they stopped, pulled over, and got the 14-year-old girl out of. Inside the car was also a 15-year-old girl who they didn't know anything about, who was on her way to meet a client for the first time. So that was all, and that was all because of the story that was done on WSB about the Unholy Tour that you guys took part in.
Well, Representative Welch struck upon the duty we have as legislators, but the duty you have as the press. You have the First Amendment. That's the First Amendment. You got a strong, difficult duty to uphold. So do it. And I appreciate CNN being amenable to put this out there and to follow this. And please, if we may need you to come back to testify. Right. And if we do, I hope you can do that. Sure. And please do publish this. Bring sunshine to this.
Yeah, it should be coming out on April 7th.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One other question. No other questions. Thank you very much.
I've got a question. How do I get my DVD back?
That would be a question for someone qualified to respond to that.
I'll just wait.
We have, I think we've been going for a few hours. We may take just a 5-minute break, and we'll be right back.
The next witness on our list is Mike Griffin of the Georgia Baptist. Is it Georgia Baptist Association? Is that right, Mr. Griffin? And Georgia Right to Life.
Thank you, Madam Chair and the committee. Appreciate your allowing me the opportunity. My name is Mike Griffin. I am Public Affairs Representative for the Georgia Baptist Convention. I'm also State Field Director for Georgia Right to Life. I'm here to speak in favor of SB 8 and SR 7. I was able last week to participate in what's been referred to as the Unholy Tour, as we went about identifying areas where sex trafficking and that type of things that were going on here in the Atlanta area. And I must say, it was pretty devastating, unbelievable, and very shocking what I was able to see that night with the group as we traveled around Atlanta. So there's no doubt that we certainly haven't done too much to be able to address this problem here in our state, and certainly we must do more. Georgia Baptist Convention and Georgia Right to Life commends Senator Unterman for all that she has done. She's worked so hard and has been such a great leader. Appreciate Street Grace and other organizations like that for all that they've done in calling attention to this problem. We certainly believe that this bill is heading in the right direction. And we've heard some good things here today from a number of testimonies and just a lot of progress that's being made. I appreciate the things that the Georgia Baptist Convention has done through the years in trying to help with this, through our Georgia Baptist Children's Home, the Palmetto campus here helps to be able to bring in some of these young ladies to be able to help them. Appreciate the Georgia Baptist Convention with the Women's Missionary Union and the things that they're doing to aid and to educate our churches, because there's no doubt that this is not just a government issue by way of getting involved, but the churches need to get involved, and we certainly want to do more of that. We believe this bill takes a step in the right direction to continue to seek to address this problem and to help those that are suffering from it. I was very interested today as I heard that it takes $80,000 a year just to be able to, as it was termed, to unbrainwash these young people. And I know this is not about gambling here today, because Georgia Baptist deal in a lot of other moral issues. Georgia Right to Life primarily deals with abortion and other life issues like that. But one of the things I brought up in the Senate hearing about trying to use social vices to bring jobs and economic development into the state is that sometimes it ends up costing us in the long run more than we receive. And this is just an example of the social expense and the governmental expense. There's no doubt that there's jobs here, and there's no doubt that it's bringing money in, but look at what it's costing us and productivity of our citizens, and then just the mental and the physical cost, the spiritual cost that's involved in all of this. I just think that's I just want to just highlight that. That's a lot of money, and to think that there are a lot more of these young people that are out there that are not getting helped, and think of how much more it's going to cost, and certainly every dime's worth it. But we also must always do that which would help prevent some of these issues as much as trying to rescue the ones that are getting involved in these things. I'm an old country boy from South Georgia, and I believe that a pound of prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth better than a pound of cure any day. And so definitely we want to be involved in making sure that we don't continue to legalize these kinds of vices. And I look at all things, gambling, pornography. We're continuing to reduce restrictions on where alcohol is being sold and the days that it's sold. Strip clubs, marijuana, all these types of issues have a backside approach that a lot of times are going to end up having a social impact, economic impact, impact on our families that certainly we can't even begin to put a dollar amount on. Let me just say something very briefly, specifically related to Georgia Right to Life, and a point that they make about why they support this bill, among other reasons, is that human traffickers treat the victims that they have as property more than respecting them as persons. And this is a direct violation of the image of God that these individuals are created in, and it denies them from their basic personhood rights. In addition, The connection between the human trafficking industry and the abortion industry is well documented as well. That's one of the reasons why Georgia Right to Life is extending their influence in some other issues like this that are related to what we do in the life issues that are out there. The majority of Georgians who support ending abortions also support ending human trafficking. And so for these and other reasons I have mentioned to you here this afternoon, we encourage your favorable consideration of SB 8 and SR 7. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. You said the majority of those who support the right to life also support this bill.
I'd have to say probably all of them do, but yeah.
If you can identify one that supports right to life,
I understand.
that doesn't
That's just
support
a
this, I'd like to know who they are.
Well, I understand. Our point is that, you know, we share a common concern, and those in the life, you know, moral issues certainly share those concerns together. This is something that we can definitely unite together.
Certainly. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Yes,
your comment on that. I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
sir. Beatrice Sublet. I apologize, Ms. Sublet.
That's all right. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee. My name is Beatrice Sublet. I'm a member of Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church and also a board member of the Interfaith Children's Movement, and I'm speaking in favor of Senate Resolution 7 and Senate Bill 8. I am a former elementary middle school principal and also a former truant officer. And I know that young people who find themselves in the horrible circumstance of being sexually exploited are in need of compassionate care and of healing and supporting services. It is my hope that the dedicated services about which we've spoken, the dedicated funds for these services do come forward, because we either pay now or we pay later in what happens in children's lives. And we want to be on the side of doing what is compassionate and what is good. It is my ardent hope that each of you, as you think about these children who are in these circumstances, see the faces of your own children and grandchildren and hope that they would not ever be in such circumstances, but if they were, that somebody would care and treat them with compassion. So I speak in favor of Senate Bill 8, Senate Resolution 7, and it is my hope that you will vote for them. Thank you for your time and for your effort.
Thank you, Ms. Sublet. I don't see any questions at this time.
Thank you.
Representative Welch to present to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, the Juvenile Justice Committee is only 2 years old, and this committee has already engaged in tackling some very serious issues, and I can't think of one that is more important than the one we're dealing with today. We are talking about young children here. The bill is called the Safe Harbor Act. It's also called Rachel's Law. Rachel could not be here. Her support staff is out of town. She is not available today to come before you. But in preparing this legislation and working with Senator Unterman on aspects of the bill, and in my previous work on this legislation, I came to know Rachel, who was a young girl duped into a relationship with whom she thought was a boyfriend. She was taken by this person and another woman to Miami on what she thought was a holiday vacation. She was then staged on the streets of Miami, walked down the streets of Miami while the woman cut deals with men, and then that evening went to a hotel and engaged in those activities that we were all just talking around. Rachel was 17 years old. She is now in college, but for the intervention of others, she might be on the streets today. She might be dead. She said that she would, and this was through many, many discussions, but she agreed to put her name on this legislation as a way of speaking in a voice that she didn't have before. She said it was time for a victim to stand up against human trafficking, against those that are engaged in the activity, the Johns, the pimps, the institutions, the entities that facilitate, attract, and help this industry thrive. She said it was time that she stood up. She didn't want to be a victim any longer. She wanted to be Rachel. Just think of names of young boys and girls that you know. Anyone could run away from home. When I was young, I ran away from home. Any one of these children could find themselves faced with the unfortunate position of being brought into this life through drug addiction, through coercion, through abuse. No child is necessarily immune and protected from it. And with social media the way it is today, the easy access to the internet, the way in which people can freely engage and interact and get from one place to the other, the ease in which we can transport ourselves around, it's no wonder the numbers aren't higher. And I'm sure that they really are. But these are the ones we know about. This particular industry is gaining more and more attention, and as Senator Unterman has said, historically we haven't been paying attention to it. But it is becoming more and more to the forefront of our lives because it is part of an underworld of raising money for drugs, for other activities, for gangs, for criminal enterprises. There's a market for this, unfortunately, and the market is only growing. The numbers that we have seen just today show a 2% growth in child sex exploitation in and around strip clubs. Just those numbers that we were given today from YouthSpark. And I want to make sure that we've been clear on a few things that I don't think were brought before the committee, but the research on human sex trafficking is quite staggering. There are 800,000 people trafficked internationally and domestically each year, 18,000 in the U.S. for sex or labor. The FBI named Atlanta one of the 14 cities in the nation with the highest incident of child exploitation and in the form of prostitution. 100 girls in Georgia are exploited each night in this state. 7,200 men pay for sex with adolescent females in Georgia each month. 1.6 million children run away each year and are approached by exploiters within 48 hours. 90% of the history have prior sexual abuse associated with them. Prevention is critical. This bill takes on the rehabilitation and the prevention. The constitutional amendment speaks exactly to rehabilitation and criminal and civil punishments and prevention. The sources, where does this happen? Well, it happens all over the place. We've talked about hotels. We've talked about, we haven't talked about it, but Craigslist, Backpage, internet sites. It happens through all kinds of media. It also happens in association with and around strip clubs. Strip clubs actively engaged in a marketplace of sexual entertainment. They are there for the purpose of attracting men, most typically, and women for the purposes of sexual stimulation, arousal, contact, engagement, and other acts. Around those facilities enjoys a marketplace for criminal activity, a secondary marketplace for all kinds of crimes. Prostitution is one of those. And within prostitution, you have human trafficking of children. The standard for the Supreme Court on whether or not we have a legitimate state interest in protecting our children from that activity is do we have an interest? Do we have a state interest in this? And clearly this committee has seen that we do. Clearly the Senate has seen that we do. Do we have an interest in protecting those children from becoming trafficked, from those children that are trafficked, giving them a life again? We do. Do we have evidence, direct evidence, of strip clubs being a venue for exploitation of children that are 18 years and older? We do. We've had 5 cases just reported to you in the last 2 days by people who have seen it firsthand. We don't need direct evidence to impose this fee. We don't need it. We need to show that there is a correlation. We have. I'm going to give to the committee a list. It's a 3-page list of cases and articles all across the United States that support all kinds of regulations, zoning, fees, regulatory licensing. All of these cases supporting the idea that government has a right and can have indeed a duty to regulate this industry and regulate it with a reasonable fee. And that may be something worth debating. But that we have that authority to do this. The policy question is whether or not we should and will. And I think Representative Sharper pointed that out. I think the interest is so compelling, and the harm in terms of taking a child that is 9 years old, 12 years old, and seeing that girl lose the entirety of her life, potentially, taking that from her as being an enormous, compelling state interest. If we're not a nation of liberty, I don't know what we are. How can we not sit here and take reasonable measures to ensure that those who have been victimized and those that may be victimized, and we can prevent that, those that are victimized, that we don't give them a life back, not the life that they're leading now, but the life that they lost. The potential to be doctors, the potential to be lawyers, the potential to be entrepreneurs, the potential to be teachers, nurses, the potential to be representatives. I think we owe that to them. Globally, sex trafficking is a $151 billion illegal industry. A pimp takes home $32,000 a week. They have what's called a stable. The lead woman that organizes the group is called the Bottom. Her job is to make about $5,000 a night. It's growing. The cost you've heard in terms of rehabilitation, we haven't really got to the rehabilitation cost. Those we've heard $80,000. You've heard $67,000 just to provide the room and board. I'm sure the costs are more in terms of society. The girls that have that are prone to this have a history of abortions and miscarriages and visits to the emergency rooms. They have chronic runaway behavior and chronic truancy behavior. This is information that was provided to us in Dr. Greenbaum's clinical report article that we got yesterday. In addition, I've sent an article to the chairman that I want to share to you in terms of the physical harm, the emotional harm. If I can pull it up. Post-traumatic stress disorder, venereal diseases, cervical cancer, anal cancer, and others, and I'm doing this from memory because I'm trying to pull the document up. It's not coming up. We're talking about traumatic physical harm. That requires medical attention, and then you have to deal with the psychological impacts that go along with this. To be certain about the legislation, we are imposing. This legislation does impose, and if the House so blesses it, it would be an imposition of a what I'm terming a criminal nuisance assessment on this industry. The industry actively seeks out those that are in the marketplace for sexual interaction, and it would impose a fee on them. Utah imposed a 10% gross revenue fee. Texas imposes a fee or a $5 cover charge. Both of these statutes have been upheld. They are they're not bars to the entry of any individuals going into the industry that wish to express themselves in that manner, in terms of a First Amendment freedom of expression point of view. They're after the fact, after this levy is after the fact and after the revenue has been collected. That is the design of the bill. We think that the bill is constitutional. The policy question for you is whether or not you think it's appropriate. And I leave that to the goodwill of the body and to this body and to the House as a whole. The Senate has seen fit. I think a way to think about this is that, in my mind, why should the taxpayers, and mind you, to date, we still don't put any state tax dollars into any fund to dedicate to help these girls, to prevent it or to treat them afterwards. We don't do that now. We put federal dollars, TANF dollars into the kitty. We use federal dollars, not our own. We don't have skin in the game here. I'm asking us to put skin in the game and dedicate it. Think about this. Why should the taxpayers of Georgia, property taxpayers, the sales taxpayers, the good average citizens that are doing their job, that are living a good life, that are not engaging and not facilitating this activity, why should they be taxed across the board? Why should we appropriate that money from them to do this? When we could decide to say, you know what, those activities which attract and create a marketplace for prostitution and other crimes are adding to our societal burden. Why not assess it there? If we could assess it elsewhere, I'd be in favor of that. But the question is, those businesses that are engaging, that are here in Georgia, that we can tax, that we can levy assessments or fees on, those businesses that we are talking about create a marketplace for this. And we're constitutionally permitted to regulate, limit, and prevent and treat those secondary pernicious effects of strip clubs in our communities. I think that is fair and reasonable. It's rational, and there's an amazing amount of support, both legal and documented from studies, that this is an appropriate and we have a rational basis for assessing this fee. There are other things in the bill that I think that I'd like to address, but I'm not going to take your time to do it because I think the committee has examined those very thoroughly. Those are just some of my thoughts on it. Mr. Chairman, I just ask you all to ask yourselves, put the and I'm a lawyer, put being a lawyer aside for a moment and just ask yourselves, what do you see if you drive down Fulton Industrial Boulevard? What do you see when you're on Chester Bridge? Is that a desirable place to go to take your spouse, take your kids? What do you see when you drive down these areas that have strip clubs along the strip? I think you know the answer. I think you do. I think common sense needs to be a part of what we do here. And I hope you'll join me in supporting this measure. Mr. Chairman, if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
Let me turn my mic on. Is there anyone here from the adult entertainment industry that would like to address the committee? We'll be having a hearing on Monday. That time will be posted as we usually post the times and the places, the rooms that we will have this hearing on Monday, or have a hearing on Monday. And we certainly welcome any comment from the adult entertainment industry. And at this point, I'm not aware of anyone who has testified in favor of the adult entertainment industry. And I want to call again, is there anyone here from the adult entertainment industry who wants to testify or take the mic or address the committee at all? Hearing none, and there being no other, I don't believe, let's see, well, excuse me, Elizabeth Apley. I do see it. She leave, okay. She wanted to testify, but apparently she had some other obligations. Is there anybody else here that would like to be heard that has not been heard? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.